everybody, my name's Eric Wood and welcome to AricTalks, a show where I talk about things that are important to me. It's a very simple concept. We're not very complicated here. So let's jump right in and talk about Gary Johnson. He's the Libertarian Party nominee for president. He got his start several years ago as the Republican governor of New Mexico. While he was governor, he made several accomplishments, including but not limited to cutting taxes, ending his term with a budget surplus, instituting statewide health care. Now, Gary Johnson has benefited quite a bit from the Never Trump movement, as well as the Never Hillary movement. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are so unpopular that Gary Johnson is breaking all kinds of records in terms of opinion polls, and polling at about 11 to 10%, well below the 15% needed for the debate stage. But Gary Johnson is remaining optimistic, saying that he hopes to climb up to that 15% as time goes on. Though it's nearly impossible for him to actually win the White House, this man has the ability to greatly impact the conversation, as he tends to focus on policy and ideology before individual personalities, a theme that hasn't been very common in this campaign season. And so it's going to be interesting to see whether or not this guy's poll numbers actually do increase as time goes on. Something to be watching. Next on today's docket is North Korea. North Korea has an extremely brutal history in the form of work camps, starvation amongst the population, and a complicated gift economy that puts all power and economic resources firmly in the hands of the Kim dynasty. This is a country dominated by one of the most pervasive propaganda machines in human history. With that said, please meet Ri-Zin-Mi. This little girl was meant to star in a propaganda film about a normal life of a family in Pyongyang, North Korea's capital city. However, the project was scrapped because the Russian filmmakers were upset with how faked the entire process was. Handlers were telling people to deliver their lines more joyfully. It was more like a stage play and less like an actual documentary. The Russian filmmakers got rightfully very angry about this. After the project was scrapped, the memory card holding the original footage was destroyed. However, the camera being used had 2 memory cards. According to producer Simone Brahman, the camera woman was very brave. She put the memory card in her trousers when she went to the toilet. They gave one of them to the North Koreans, and the second one they took with them. It's a full memory card with hours and hours of completely unadulterated footage. This footage has found its way into the US via a documentary named Under the Sun. This is an unprecedented opportunity to peer into one of the most oppressive and secretive regimes of all time. I left a link in the description for a trailer of this documentary. I cannot express how unprecedented this opportunity is. Next up, Great Britain has voted to leave the European Union. Bad news for these guys, bad news for these guys, great news for this guy. Horrible news for these guys. But what we're yet to see is whether or not this is a good or bad thing for Great Britain. And we're not going to be able to see for several years as the economic and political impact sinks in. On to the next slightly less political subject. Slightly. The new Ghostbusters movie has gotten a lot of criticism lately over the fact that it has an all-female cast. But the head executive on this movie, Tom Rothman, has actually gone out and thanked all the haters. Can we please get some more haters to say stupid things? What was originally looking like a box office flop is now going to be a heavily successful movie, proving the old cliche, all publicity is good publicity. Let's also take this as a reminder. Giving attention to something you hate isn't going to kill it. Now, let's slow down and dive a little bit deeper. Today's show is brought to you by political ideologies. Political ideology, surprisingly having very little to do with modern politics. We have a tendency in today's media-driven age to see politicians simply as memes and caricatures, rather than actual complex individuals with motives, agendas, and ideologies. So let's take into account 3 major ideologies which make up the majority of American politics: liberalism, conservatism, and populism. The idea behind the liberal/progressive ideology is that they want things to be changing and improving and generally moving forward. The conservative ideology wants to maintain and conserve, exactly like its name implies. Traditions produce stability. And so conservatives generally like stability and order. Now, it's important to remember that no one is fully conservative and no one is really fully liberal. People who are liberal don't think that all traditions are fundamentally evil, nor do they think that everything needs to change. Conservatives, on the other hand, acknowledge that there are flaws in the past and also want to be progressive and move things forward. You can't necessarily put someone in a single ideological box. However, arguably one of the most important political ideologies of America is populism. Populism isn't so much an actual ideology as it is a movement. It's simply the idea that something is popular and someone can manage to grab hold of that popularity. So just remember that. Populism is popular, no matter what. Donald Trump is a textbook populist. He doesn't really fall into any traditional ideological categories. And even Bernie Sanders, to a certain extent, exudes some qualities of populism. To understand populism better, it's easy to think about taxes and government spending. Taxes are unpopular, but government spending is really popular. Now, any sensible person will tell you you can't necessarily cut taxes and increase government spending at the same time. But oftentimes, that's what populist candidates promise to do. They'll cut taxes and increase government spending, which is not necessarily good. Populism isn't necessarily bad either. For example, we had a president, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is one of the most famous populists in American history, and he did a lot of good things. For example, he increased American suffrage. More people had access to voting. Democracy is good, right? But he also produced the Trail of Tears. There's a reason you're getting replaced on the $20 bill, Jackson. Sorry. Only not because you did horrible things to the Native Americans in this country. And speaking of Jackson, interested in learning more about populism or Andrew Jackson, might I recommend Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, the punk rock musical about one of America's early presidents. Surprisingly good! It's fantastic, actually. I highly recommend you check it out. Link in the description. At the end of the day, whether you're American, British, Canadian, whoever, voters have a tendency to get obsessed with individual personalities. Take time to think about what you think and how what you think affects the way you vote. With that said, that's our show for the day. I hope you enjoyed it. You are a beautiful human being. Try to change the world today. And sincerely yours, Eric Wood.